I'm all about trying to be on time, so we're going to go ahead and get started for the day. So I want to welcome everybody to our Northwest Invasive Species training. I know we may have people from different areas of the state as well, but we welcome you still because a lot of the information will still translate to different areas. This program was basically brought to you by Purdue Extension and some of the SISMAs up in this area. You will hear from both of them this afternoon. This morning you'll still hear from both of them. One of them is called PLANT for the acronym. It's the Porter and LaPorte Advancing Natives team, as well as the Stark and Plasky SISMA that I apologize right now. I forgot their name, but I'm sure Phil can mention it as soon as I have him come on. Oh, go ahead, Phil. What's their name again? I'm sorry.
It's the Stark Plasky Native Plant Initiative. So.
All right, awesome. So basically, members from the different groups have kind of tried to bring you this training today. My name is Nikki Witkowski with the Porter County Extension Office here in Porter County, and I basically am the Agricultural and Natural Resources Extension Educator for this county. So just so that you know kind of the protocol, how we're going to go today is we will have some varied both videos as well as PowerPoints or some live workings on some of these topics that we are talking about. We will start with Phil Woolery, who will be talking about some research and stuff they have done with burning bush and going on from there. For those of you who are needing pesticide credits, we will talk about how you will get those at the end of the program. So make sure you stay tuned for the end. Granted, I know the program is only supposed to last 2 hours. If for some reason we start going over the 2-hour mark, we will still make sure that we get that from you at 2 hours to be respectful of your time. So yes, we will tell you how to quote register or confirm that you're on for that. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to our first presenter, Phil Woolery, who already told me he'll introduce himself. So go on, Phil. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nikki. I'm Phil Woolery. I work for Purdue Extension as well, but I'm in Stark and Pulaski counties. In my background, this is not either of those counties, but I made a video. We started working at the Purdue Farm, which is in LaPorte County, and they've got a forest there. And one big problem species they have in that woods is the winged burning bush. It's very common, so in this video that I'm going to share, talk about what we're doing there, because this is going to be a multi-year process, and this is just the first year, so some kind of preliminary results. And so I'll start sharing, and at the end we'll have time for questions on this as well. This is Phil Woolery with Purdue Extension, and today I'm out at the Purdue Ag Center in the forest here, and I'm going to talk about winged burning bush. Now, winged burning bush is a very popular ornamental plant. It is widely planted in people's yards for many reasons. It's very easy to grow, doesn't have a lot of insect or disease problems, and it has very beautiful fall colors. On the downside, what we have in this woods here is that it also produces seeds that spread out into our native woodlands. And these bushes, they're all fairly shade tolerant, so they can grow well in the understory of forests. The reason why it's called winged burning bush is it'll have these corky growths on some of the branches, and it tends more on better, faster growing plants. It's not always seen, but it has opposite leaves and with finely serrated margins. Usually in the fall, when in the ornamental ones you see in the yard, the ones with full sun will have a dark red color, but gets its name burning bush. In the woods, oftentimes in more shade, it'll have more of a pinkish color to it as they turn. So that's another thing to look for when you're looking for them in the woods. So one big problem with this is that it produces a lot of shade, and these are just getting started, and these can grow 8 to 10 feet tall and put out dense shade with nothing growing underneath it. And so that's bad for regenerating our tree species and other native species that provide better wildlife habitat and value of the woodland for timber value and everything like that. Another bad thing about this compared with some of our other common invasive species in the woodlands, like Asian bush honeysuckle. Asian bush honeysuckle is very easy to kill. And you'll often see these coming out from one central spot, and it's very easy to kill with a one herbicide treatment.
In the woods at the Purdue Ag Center, burning bush is spread into many areas of the woods. These bushes can be over 8 feet in height and produce dense shade that nothing will grow under. They will also produce seed that can come up in very dense stands that carpets the forest floor. In this area, we set up several different treatment areas to look at the efficacy of different herbicides and timing of application on the control of burning bush. For the time of year for application, we had June and September treatments. The different herbicide treatments include glyphosate, that is a trade name of Roundup. Another herbicide was triclopyr, which has a trade name of Garlon. These are both foliar herbicides that are not active in the soil. The other herbicide used is metsulfuron methyl with the trade name of Escort. The Escort has foliar activity and also some soil activity. The 4 herbicide treatments that we used were glyphosate alone, glyphosate on Escort, triclopyr alone, and triclopyr with Escort. There was also mechanical treatment where the large stems were cut with no herbicides used. Before the application of herbicides, we took measurements of the burning bush in each plot. We measured the plants in 3 different classes. The percent cover of plants that are under 12 inches, the number of plants that are 1 to 3 feet, and the number of plants that are over 3 feet tall. This allows us to get a baseline on the populations and to track changes through time. The herbicides were applied from tanks and pumps on an ATV. A dye was added to the herbicide to mark plants that have been treated. The same equipment was used to apply all of the herbicides. So now we're going to take a little tour of all the plots that were treated in June and see the effects of the herbicides on the burning bush after a single growing season.
Here we are in the glyphosate only treatment from June, and you can see here we have some dead and some still living, so kind of a patchwork here, probably having to deal with different coverage issues and different things with the amount of spray each plant got. Here we are in the glyphosate and Escort treatment. We can see here we have patches with good control and then others that have not so good control. So it could be issues with coverage, which will happen. There's still some in some of these patches, there's still green stems, so we'll have to see if that Escort will prevent it from leafing out in the spring. Here's a patch in the triclopyr only treatment. This is a patch of young plants that I'd say 90% of them look dead at this point. There's still a few with green stems and a couple green leaves on there, but this case we had good treatment in this area. So I might have had this treatment in this area, a little more coverage to get a better kill on this. This one individual plant here has still some leaves left on it, but most of them have fallen off, and we still have green stems, telling us it's still alive at this point. We'll have to see in the future, in the spring, how it responds after this one treatment. Here we are in the Garlon or triclopyr alone treatment. You can see We have some defoliation of plants. There's still some with green stems, and we'll have to see if they come back in the spring or not. So this is again in the June treatment, and again we have a lot of off-target plants that have been killed as well, but that's all part of the long-term plan to eradicate this and allow the native vegetation to come back. Here we are in the Garlon or Triclopyr plus Escort treatment. As you can see, we've got a lot of defoliation of the burning bush. There are still some with some leaves on, and we still have green stems in some locations. So the hope with the Escort added, the soil active portion, it will take out these plants and not have them sprout back in the spring. As you can see here, here's the kind of overview of the plot. And we come over here looking at the plot border, looking at the outside of the plot. We have a large difference in vegetation. So one consequences of doing these treatments, especially in these heavily infested areas with invasive species, you're going to have a lot of off-target consequences. So some of the good vegetation that we don't want to kill, we're going to end up killing. And that's just the nature of the game. So it'd be really hard and inefficient to treat each individual burning bush here without hitting any desirable vegetation. And we're looking at the long-term impact here. So if we didn't do anything, it would just be taken over by burning bush and kill out all the other native vegetation. This way, we're allowing that native vegetation to come back. So by trying to get rid of the burning bush, we still have some that we'll have to come back and treat, but hopefully we'll have fewer and fewer and reduce the seed population, reduce the seed production, and so we can allow the native desirable vegetation to recolonize the site after the burning bush has been controlled. Here we are in the mechanical treatment. In this treatment, all the large burning bushes were physically cut down at about ground level, and no herbicide was used. And notice that the ground cover around here is very similar to our herbicide treatments, and that is because the cover of this burning bush was so dense that nothing could grow underneath it. So you're still seeing the effect of that dense shade that it put down. Now, although it looks good now, without any further other treatments, we see a stump right here, and it is already sprouting back. So without any further treatments, these will grow back to the same size, and we're also might see some germination of burning bush seeds, that these plants put off a lot of seeds, and there's a possibility that they might be stored in the seed bank. We're not for sure on that, but we might find out here soon.
And now let's take a look at some of the preliminary data that we collected in October on the June treatments. The September treatments didn't have enough time yet to do an accurate measurement, so we'll wait for next year on those. So here we have the preliminary data from the June treatment. We have 3 sets of measurements that we took in each plot. You will notice that in the different plots, they had different starting points with the infestation. The plots to the north tended to have fewer burning bush. These differences can be taken into account when looking at the relative changes. In the first graph, we have percentage cover for plants that are under 12 inches. All of the herbicide treatments saw decreases except for the glyphosate alone. And you can see a slight increase here, but that could be due to some measurement error. Herbicide treatments that had escort seem to have the larger decreases in coverage. In this graph, we see the number of plants between 1 and 3 feet in height per acre. And here we see that the only two treatments that had significant decreases were the glyphosate with escort and the triclopyr alone. These had a 70% and a 40% decrease in number of plants. This graph shows the number of plants per acre that are over 3 feet in height. These are the larger seed-producing plants. You can see the treatments all had decreases in the number of burning bushes, except for the triclopyr alone treatment. The largest decrease was seen in the glyphosate and escort treatment, with about a 90% decrease in number of plants. So far, we don't have a clear answer on which chemical treatment works best. In the three classes of plants that we're looking to control, the glyphosate and escort did the best in all three. We will wait for the spring to see what comes back from these treatments. There were still green stems without leaves in these treatment plots, and those might have the potential to resprout. We also need to check on the efficacy of the fall treatments, because fall is the typical time of year that has the best control for chemical treatments on invasive species.
So this is we're ending up the first summer of our treatment of this demonstration. We've done our June treatments and working on the fall treatments, or September ones. We'll be back in the next year to do another section of the woods and do some spring and summer treatment, or fall treatment as well. And so we'll be able to see these different blocks side by side, and after these single treatments, what kind of control we get from the burning bush, what kind of response we get from vegetation. We're collecting data on the plots, on the vegetation, the amount of burning bush we find in here. And we'll be able to share that, and in future field days have in person, be able to walk through to see for yourself what kind of control you can get with different treatments.
All right, so yeah, that was there. Our like I said in the video, we've got those sets, and we're going to do another one. So the idea is you can walk through those plots, hopefully, once everything gets back to normal, and see, you compare, this year it looks like this, but then, the next year it's going to look like that. So that's the hope. And I've been told, I worked in the foresters with the F&R department, Forestry Natural Resources, at Purdue campus, and the one Don Carlson you saw in the video doing the treatments, he has lots of troubles with this bush, and he says this is the only one where trying to kill this bush, he actually kills trees, not intentionally. So it can be a tough one for us. So any questions? I guess, Nikki, we can unmute or do the chats if anyone has any questions on that.
I have a question, Phil.
Yep.
This is Darlene. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
For the burning bush, you were talking about when it gets into really deep shade. Is it possible that when it gets into really deep shade, it doesn't get more than about 12 inches or 18 inches tall?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yeah, when the burning bush, you were talking that it doesn't grow as tall when it's in deep shade.
Oh, it does grow like that. Like there's in the deep shade, in our woodland, but it was 10, 12 foot tall, and it puts out that deep shade underneath there. So that last section where I was standing there, where nothing was growing, those bushes there were 10 foot tall.
Okay, well, what if there are other trees that are putting out some deep shade, and the burning, like I have a landowner with a plant that looks a heck of a lot like burning bush, but he says it doesn't get any taller than 18 inches, but it's in the middle of the woods in pretty deep shade.
Well, one thing about it, it seems that this plant, the deer like to eat it. So
Okay.
that could be depending on their deer population, because I know at my place, plenty of deer there, and I found some
Yeah, he's
burning
got
bush
plenty
out
of deer.
there, and it's about that tall and it's all gnawed down. You know, they eat it pretty hard.
Okay.
So it definitely, you know, um, Jared Brook is saying a coralberry has similar looking leaf and only grows about 2 to 3 feet tall.
Okay. Thanks, Jared.
But yeah, coralberry, that's more in the honeysuckle family, and it won't have the serrated margins on the leaves there.
Okay. Does it also, I guess Jared can answer this, or either you, the coralberry, does it also have some of the winging in the stems?
No.
No, it won't. Okay.
It'll have like the berries will be more of a pinkish, like coral color, you know, the coral berry.
Okay. That makes sense.
And then, like the burning bush has those red berries on them. Jared asked if I've been out to check. The last time I didn't have time. I was out there end of October, but I didn't get a chance to get out in the woods. When we looked in September, the leaves on that fall treatment at the end when we did the measurements, we didn't measure that because the leaves were just starting to change color on the what was treated at the beginning of September. So we waited about like 3 weeks after treatment, and it was just starting to take effect. So I think we've been pretty dry up here. So I'm thinking that might have had an effect. You know, if the plants aren't, what we say with herbicides, if the plants aren't actively growing. So if they're under stress, they're not going to take up that herbicide as well. So that could be an effect we'll see in the fall treatment as well. So we'll gonna have to check it out in the spring. So yeah, so next year there, like we saw those 2 blocks of spring and a fall treatment, and we're going to do another set right there. So the idea is you can walk through and see multiple years at once. Like, okay, 1 year after treatment is going to look like this, and this first year is going to look like that. So, and we'll also check if, you know, like I mentioned that Don had said that, you know, sometimes with that escort, it's soil active. So there's the potential that you could kill some of the overstory trees. So we will be watching for that too, and remarking on that. So that's a risk with that herbicide as well. Have more off-target effects than the triclopyr or the glyphosate alone. Any other questions? All right. Well, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me by email or anything if you want to talk more. So, and hopefully we designed this for in-person things. So hopefully next year we could maybe do something in person, so you can go out and actually see things. It'd be better next year to have 2 sets of treatments and everything for you to look at. So.
And feel free to go ahead and keep entering questions into the chat as well, because there's time at the end. I'm pretty sure Phil's sticking around to the end, so we can circle back to some of those as we have time. All right, so our next presenter is going to be Callie Bontrager with the DNR. She is going to discuss with us about Japanese knotweed troubles and things like that, and go from there. So Callie, did you want to try sharing your screen, or do you want me to do it?
I'm going to try and share my screen. We'll see what happens.
All right. If there's a little bit of a glimpse, we may switch topics because internet connectivity is always fun. So, all right, awesome. Well, with no further ado, I'm going to let you go, Callie, and I appreciate you joining us this morning.
Okay, that's better. We're getting closer. Maybe.
You are good. You just, if you put it in presentation mode, you should be good, Callie.
Okay, presentation mode is slide sorter, slideshow.
There you go, slideshow.
Okay, there it goes. I clicked on it once and it didn't want to do it. Okay.
Yep.
Are we ready?
Go ahead. Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for having me here. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kelly Bontrager. I'm with the Department of Natural Resources, Division of Entomology and Plant Pathology, which is bugs and blights. So I cover the Northwest, what we call the Northwest Territory, which is everybody in the Central Time Zone up here. So, and then I do Pulaski a little bit. I cover Pulaski also, even though they go back and forth depending what part of Pulaski you're actually in. So my main job is I'm a nursery inspector and compliance officer. So part of the time I spend running around looking at people's plants that they're going to sell. I check up on the nursery dealers, especially the big box stores that get a lot of stuff in. If we did a lot of time this spring with invasive, the Indiana terrestrial plant law. So we're looking at plants coming in that weren't supposed to be being sold. We do deal with invasive species all the way around. We do quite a bit of everything, it seems like. So I'm going to talk about Japanese knotweed today, and I'm going to go through just some general stuff about it, and then maybe take some questions at the end if I don't get too long-winded. So Japanese knotweed is on our terrestrial plant law. It's known by at least 3 different scientific names. And we have all 3 on the terrestrial plant law. So anybody that's trying to get it in can't get it around by naming it, saying it's a different scientific name, because we run into that. It's originally native to Japan and China and some parts of Korea and Taiwan. It's presently in all over the globe right now. Most of the European countries, UK has a big problem with it. Canada, Australia, Germany, New Zealand, Chile. I think Chile might be one of the few South American ones, but that's the only one I saw for sure. So it is definitely a problem all across the globe. So here in the United States, it was introduced in the late 1800s, pretty much more as an ornamental, because it is pretty and it does grow very quickly. Some people are using it almost as hedgerows. By the 1900s, it was becoming established in the eastern states. As of right now, I think there are 43 states that have actually reported it in the United States. Indiana being one of them, and I think in Indiana, just about all of the counties in Indiana, except maybe 2 or 3, have actually reported it. Yeah. This is from EdMaps. Thank you, EdMaps. It was nice to be able to pull this up and get an idea of where it's been actually reported from the EdMaps, though it doesn't show the full 43 states, but it does show what EdMaps is seeing. And if you look at Indiana, we're pretty much, it's been reported all through Indiana, unfortunately. In my territory up here in the northwest part of the state, I don't know, I drive a lot. And one place that really comes to mind is driving US 30 going west towards Maryville out of Valpo. There's a big patch of it along there. So it's really obvious once you know what you're looking at. It's also been known as Mexican bamboo, Renostria, Japanese fleece flower. There's a lot of different names. It is a perennial that's kind of semi-woody. When it dies back for the year, the stems actually kind of look like bamboo. It forms really dense clumps that are very tall. They can get up to 15 feet tall. The stems are kind of glaucous, kind of shiny, and they're reddish colored when they first emerge, and then they turn green, but still sometimes have a speckle of red in them. The node where the leaf meets the stem is really swollen. The leaves are very big, kind of roundish, kind of triangular with a point at the end. If the flowers weren't actually in panicles and groups, you probably wouldn't really notice them because they're very, very small individually, but they are on panicles, so it's really obvious. The fruit is 3-winged, and the inside the actual fruit itself is kind of a shiny black seed. The really big problem with it are the rhizomes, because the rhizomes can reach up to 15 feet long, and they are really hard to get rid of. Okay, so the height of it, I mean, it can go from emerging as a perennial to 15 feet by the end of summer. So this gives you an idea of how big this perennial can get and what kind of clumps it gets into. So there's this gentleman in there in the middle of them. I'm not quite sure what he was doing. It was just a great picture to show height-wise what Japanese knotweed looks like. These are the actual seeds. They're not really big. They're like a third of an inch long when it comes down to it. They've got that three-winged kind of a papery covering, whitish covering on the outside. So they can be dispersed by wind, and birds will just use the seeds and disperse them. But this isn't, you know, sometimes they're not fertile. So this isn't the main way it actually spreads. It does spread. If these seeds drop into the water, they will float quite a while. And if they're fertile, they will spread by that. But that's not the main way they spread. The main way this plant actually spreads is by rhizomes. This is a picture of a stem, probably more into getting into late spring into summer. You can kind of see the swollen nodes, the kind of shiny stem, greenish with the red specklings on them. So it's very erect. You know, when they grow it, they tend to be really, really erect. The leaves, this is the leaves. They are what we call broadly ovate with tapering to that nice point, but they can be really big. They're 2 to 6 inches long, and I think anywhere from 2 to 5 inches wide. So it is a very large leaf, and when it's in full growth, it does shade out everything underneath them. It's really hard for anything to grow under a clump of this Japanese knotweed. Good picture of the flowers. It is a pretty flower. It's actually a pretty plant. It's too bad it's so invasive. As I said, the flowers are really tiny. They tend to be a whitish green, but they grow on panicles and groups. So when it's flowering, you know, they are really obvious when you see them flowering. But that's another identification of them. So we first start seeing the plant emerging early spring, and it just starts out as if in that top left corner, just looks like little red buds coming up, almost like asparagus is what it first looks like when it comes up, kind of that kind of shape. Especially when they start breaking bud and they start growing, and you can see in the third picture as you come around the circle is they really do resemble asparagus, young asparagus at this time. And actually in Asia, they are cut at this time and used. I have not tried it. I don't know that I want to, because I'd rather not see any of this plant. As it continues to grow, depending on where it's at, it really starts to grow very quickly. And since it grows so quickly, it can displace and really crowd out any native vegetation. There's been some studies that show that it also might have an inhibiting effect on anything trying to grow underneath it or around it. So I think there's still ongoing studies about that. By the end of the growing season, it's up to 15 foot tall. So it's really will crowd things out. When it dies back in the winter, you can see in that far left picture that it's just a bunch of brown stems, and having nothing growing underneath it, it's pretty unsightly in your landscape. So I'm just going to go through real quick, get a closer picture. So these are your spring pictures, what you first start seeing. You know, you might not notice it right off the bat unless you already know you've got a group of them in your area when they first start breaking bud. As they continue to grow, they become really obvious in areas, especially when they get to the full size of what they are. I mean, it's amazing. I wish I'd taken some pictures this summer of them, and I should have. As I was driving by, I thought about it a lot when I was driving by on 30, or there's a spot in Westville off of a county road that I know of that I was like, oh, I should stop and take those pictures, and I never took the time to do it. about this time of year, this is what you're going to be seeing. They tend to stay greener a little bit later than some of the other plants around them, some of the other perennials. So they start turning a yellowish color, but I'm right, depending on how dry it is, but they don't seem to mind the drought too much either. And this is winter again. So you see it's just kind of brown stems. If you look at the end of, you can see it's a hollow sweet family, I believe. So it can become a little dangerous if you've cut it down and you're trying to walk across it or put something on it. So those stems can get pretty sharp. So what's the big problem about Japanese knotweed? It's been around for a long time, but why do we worry about it? There's several reasons we really worry about it. I've touched on some of them. Overall, it's native habitat. It tends to like moist, open, sunny to partially shaded areas. That being said, it can tolerate a wide variety of conditions. It doesn't mind full shade. It can get into almost it can do full sun to almost full shade. It doesn't seem to mind high temperatures. It doesn't seem to have like winter kill back as far as killing the roots. It doesn't mind salinity. It doesn't mind drought. It really likes to go into areas that have been disturbed, where it can get a fresh start and colonize an area very easily. It does, like I said, you see it on roadways a lot, I think, because of the fact that there might be a little ditch along the roadway and, seeds might have got it started. And once it gets into a really nice area, it really spreads out very, very quickly. So that's one thing, is it has so many conditions it can tolerate. That's one of the things that make it really difficult to control. You can't just say, oh, it's only going to be here, it's only going to be there. Again, it's very fast growing. Since it's a perennial that goes from nothing, from the ground to 15 feet by the end of summer. And it spreads out very, very quickly along the rhizomes. So, when it's that fast growing and spreads out that quickly, it kind of reminds me to a certain extent of kudzu, though it doesn't grow as fast as kudzu does, kudzu being a vine, but it does have that kind of quick growth that, we look at that will really outcompete any natives we've got and outshade them. Monoculture, again, that once it gets into an area and spreads out, it grows so quickly, it outcompetes with any natives. And then it was kind of like when Phil was talking about the burning bush, nothing can grow underneath it. So even once it dies back in the winter, there's nothing there, and there's not much that feeds on it, unfortunately. So we get these huge stands of just Japanese knotweed, and it's any of our native flowers or anything like that has been totally shaded out. Makes for a really hard area for anything to live. And this is where we get to really how hard it becomes to eradicate. The rhizomes are what it makes this really, really difficult, because these rhizomes get very thick and they grow up to 10 feet. And this is where the plant comes from most of the time. It's not the seed population. It's a vegetative sprouter. So it sprouts right off of these rhizomes. So if any of these rhizomes break off, they'll grow still. So if you're pulling it out, it's really hard to get. The same thing if you're trying to just cut it back, if you're missing parts or you're spreading parts of the rhizomes or the plant, sometimes it'll even grow from the plant itself that's been cut back. So eradicating this is a very time-consuming project. Again, very, very adaptable. It doesn't need much soil to grow in. It does like the roadsides, probably because it tends to be moist or very disturbed areas, and it can colonize those very quickly. But even if you look at the left-hand picture, this has actually managed to colonize along cracks between the wall and the sidewalk there. So it doesn't take much to get this particular plant growing. There are some control methods out there, depending on how big of a a stand of Japanese knotweed you have, and it varies. None of it's really, there's no set thing really. Sometimes it's better with two-pronged. You can go anywhere from manual removal, if you can pull out the young when they first starting to sprout, the young ones in the spring, the young plants, or dig them out again. But when you're doing any kind of digging or pulling, you have to make sure you get those rhizomes all the way out, because if you leave any bit, they're just going to sprout back up. There are places that actually go in with excavators to try and just dig out that top layer and get rid of these plants. It was interesting looking at some more of this stuff about what's going on in the UK and how much trouble they're having with it. So the thing is when you do try and do any kind of removal, it's got to be bagged. It can't be composted unless you can lay it out on a tarp where it can't be blown away and it can just dry totally out. I mean, but it's got to be totally dry before you can do anything with it. So you can do that manually, lots labor intensive. In small areas for a homeowner, they might be able to do this. You might be able to do this and combine it with herbicides, and I'll talk about those here in a sec. Another idea for homeowners or small areas is actually smothering it. And this is good for sensitive areas too, where you might not be able to do herbicides or you don't want to disturb the land that much. The idea is to cut it off close to the ground, and then you take a tarp of some sort that's really dark and cover the whole area plus 5 feet beyond, because sometimes those plants will shoot sideways and try and get out from underneath that tarp if there's a chance. So I guess 5 feet has been researched that usually if you cover beyond those 5 feet, you've got it. That tarp will keep the light from coming in, and it will also restrict the water. So the thing is if you've cut it off, as those stems dry out, they do get sharp. So sometimes if they continue to grow a little bit, they might try and pop out through that tarp. So it's got to be a pretty heavy duty tarp, and it's got to be covered for at least a season, preferably 2. I mean, if you can cover it from spring into winter, that hopefully will take care of what's going on. Again, this is really more ideal for small areas that you might find right off the bat. Herbicide is another one. There's the cut stump method, which again is probably going to work best for areas that are sensitive, where there's a lot of non-target plants that you don't want to just spray a foliar. So what happens is you go in and cut the stem about 2 inches up, and then spray it spray it with either glyphosate or triclopyr, both at about 25% water solution. And the problem with that is even after that, you still have to monitor it. You might have to come back and control, seedlings again. Foliar spray is just what it sounds like. You're treating the foliage as much as you can with 2% glyphosate or trichloropril. You best bet when you do either one of these is to use a surfactant to help penetrate the cuticle, the leaf cuticle especially. It can keep it protected a bit. It's been shown that there's been some research that fall is a more effective time to be treating this particular plant, as the leaves are translocating down to the rhizomes. So it's taking all the way down the rhizomes and hopefully killing that off. Usually you have to do a couple years of this because of whether seedlings or, you might not get all the leaves treated. So some of the rhizomes don't get affected. It's just a really tough plant to deal with, as most invasives are. That's why they're invasive, is because there's usually no really easy way to take care of it. There is research ongoing for biological control. This is a type of psyllid that actually will attack the leaf, and in large enough numbers can stress the plant out enough to keep it under control. It won't kill it. Very unlikely that it'll kill it, but it does help keep it in control in its native range. Some of the other things that have been out there looked at, there's some there's a fungus out there that they're looking at in the native range, whether it'll do anything. There's some some leaf spots, diseases, and things. But again, most of this stuff is still in the research stage. It's really hard it takes a long time to go from the research stage to being able to just put out biological controls. We've been through that already with other biological controls of just mass releasing them before they were looked at. So that's pretty much where we're at with Japanese knotweed. As far as the state of Indiana goes, we ourselves aren't doing any treatment. Our division is really, really tiny. And so, but I am more than happy to assist anybody. It's kind of something that's going to be done on a county or community level. Like I said, I'm here to answer questions and try and help give some ideas or identify things. It is on our terrestrial plant law, so it cannot be grown, sold, or moved or given away or any of that stuff. So that's probably not a big thing for you folks, but if you happen to see it out in sales, which I haven't seen it actually being sold anywhere, please let me know and we'll get it taken care of. So I think that's it. If anybody's got any questions, did I go too fast or too slow, Nikki?
You are pretty good. So
Oh, good.
definitely do have time for some questions. I do know I had seen a couple in the chat. Do you want me to read them to you?
Sure.
The first one is, will knotweed grow well in the shade?
It won't grow well. It does grow in the shade. It will not grow as fast in the shade. I'm not sure how big but it will still grow in in large enough areas to kill out anything underneath it. And really, especially in areas where you might have paths that might be a little bit more sunlight or a tree falling, especially near a waterway where it might be able to either be seeded in or unfortunately brought in on somebody's boots or whatever. But yeah, it will grow in the shade.
All right. I'm going to ask this one.
Okay.
It sounds like you may have already answered it, but just so that we all hear the answer. So for invasives that grow close to watersheds, creeks, and environmentally sensitive environments, is there a different approach, I think it's just other than herbicides?
Yes. For this particular plant, you can try just doing a cut method and then smothering it. I know in some areas, continually cutting it all year long helps keep it under control. But the big thing about that is you got to make sure it's not spraying anything out into the waterways to have it transported downstream. So it's a lot more intensive, but it is possible. It'll take a lot longer. But if you can, smothering it's the best way to do it for that, or trying to dig it out. But if you're digging it out along a waterway, you're going to run into erosion problems. Though, as soon as you start pulling that dirt away, because you have to get down and get all those rhizomes out of there. Does that kind of answer the question?
We'll see if they bring anything else up. And if anybody else does have, yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
So if anybody else has any further questions, you can either unmute or keep typing in the chat pod.
So I'm not sure if you covered this, but my question is, we talked about the rhizome spreading, but if you cut the stems and they go float down the creek or whatever, will the stems resprout? Is that a method for spreading as well?
Yes, unfortunately, there's been some studies and shown that, that is some ways that they unfortunately will sprout out, especially if they're fairly, if they're nice and green, and then they get somewhere where they're kind of lodged into some dirt and stuff, they will resprout.
Kelly, I'd like to offer a follow-up. So, because you mentioned on the waterways, you mentioned that, you could dig it out. Would there be any recommendation, like on the waterways, to help reclaim that bank of doing either an immediate replanting of something else or putting like riprap rocks or something else to help stabilize that bank either in the interim or?
Yeah, definitely have to do something to stabilize the bank. I had a list of things that could be planted in lieu of it, but I don't have it anywhere near me and I can't remember them off the top of my head. But yeah, I think actually doing two things, trying to replant and then putting down some kind of barrier to help control the erosion. You'd want to do both to try and reclaim that right away. Yeah.
Yeah, I know stuff about stream bank restoration, but there's things you can plant like willow stakes and stuff like that will take over a site pretty quickly to control erosion. So
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Okay. And Callie, you're able to stick on if some more questions do arise in the chat pod.
Yeah. Yep. This was my plan for this morning, is if I'm going to have to talk, I might as well listen to the rest of it.
Oh, I'm glad that you're welcome. So if you do have any further questions or something does pop up, I definitely don't want to limit discussions, but I know sometimes it takes a little bit for things to sink in and settle in. So
yeah,
we'll stay around and we can come back to any questions that do arise. So
yep. And thanks for inviting me to talk. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was very nice and informative. So with that, we will move on to our next speaker, Jared Brook, who is going to talk, I'm going to say in general, about now Phragmites and the issues that they may cause.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So I'm going to talk about Phragmites, but I'm also going to cover a few more in common wetland invasive plants that you may see kind of growing in the same area as you would Phragmites. So we're going to go with a trifecta of species, certainly cover Phragmites, but we'll get into other ones. So this is probably not new information to many people, but when we talk about invasives, we're talking about issues with them outcompeting and replacing native plants. And when we talk about wetland invasives, we're talking about the effects that they have on those wetland ecosystems, which are so important to the filtration of water, the collection of water, the providing habitat for abundance of wildlife species, plant diversity, all those different kind of things. And the way that invasives can impact wetlands is obviously by reducing plant diversity or reducing, changing, or eliminating habitat for certain wildlife species. But they can also change the wetland hydrology and natural functions. So they can cause issues with how the wetlands function as those filters of water and how much surface water is there and all that kind of thing. And then if we think about the aesthetics of a wetland and how wetlands are used, they can change the aesthetics or how wetlands look. They can change how you can see and view a wetland. And that can also change how you might recreate in or around wetlands, whether that's trying to watch wildlife, whether that's trying to hunt, fish, boat, all those kind of things. Wetland or invasive species in wetlands can cause those issues. And when we talk about the invasive species today, we're going to cover more of the terrestrial. We're covering just some terrestrial or invasives that are on the land, not necessarily invasives that are going to be kind of free floating in the water. So we're going to talk about some of the ones that you'll find on the shores, on the banks, and maybe even up a little bit farther. So like the first one we're going to talk about is common reed, which is often called Phragmites. So you'll hear people call it common reed, or you'll hear people call it by its genus, which is Phragmites. And it was originally introduced from Europe, potentially in the late 1700s, early 1800s, depending on what source you go with. It's a warm season perennial grass, meaning that it is growing and green during the summer, during the hottest months. And then it is actually dormant pretty much all the way from about now until about March or April. It's a pretty easy one to spot. It grows 10 to 15 feet tall in large, dense clumps. If you drive anywhere on I-65 up through Northwest Indiana onto the toll road or anywhere like that, you can easily spot clumps of Phragmites from the roadway and from your car going 70 miles an hour. You can easily spot them. They're pretty easy to tell apart. They're going to be flowering from July to August to October. So they're just now transitioning into the point where they've went dormant, and they're now getting ready to spread or shed their seeds. One of the characteristics you can use to really tell Phragmites apart from other wetland plants, other than its just large size and dense clump, is its silky seed head, which we'll see a picture of here in a second. And it spreads by seeds blowing offside or falling in the water and being transported in other places. It spreads by rhizomes as well. So it's a rhizomatous plant, and it can spread quickly that way. And it can also be spread by moving soil off-site. And that can be soil that's, attached to equipment, soil that's attached to four-wheelers, ATVs, UTVs, trucks, anything like that. There's soil caked in there. It can be spread from the soils, the rhizomes, and the seed. And you typically find Phragmites obviously around water. It's going to be in wetlands. You see it all the time in ditches, roadsides, waterways, and then in really disturbed soils as well. So areas where soil has been moved and may have wetter soils, you're going to see Phragmites. And it is important to note out that there is a native subspecies of Phragmites that you will see. You don't see it very often. It can be kind of hard to tell apart from the invasive Phragmites, but it tends to be smaller, shorter in size with a few differences. So some of the key ways that you can tell Phragmites from other wetland plants is by its size and dense growth pattern. So you're not going to really find any other native wetland plants other than trees and shrubs that are going to be 10 to 15 to 20 feet tall. So it goes in this dense form, and this is what it looks like in the summer. Typically, you see most of the green on that upper half of the plant. And then in the winter, it's going to go dormant and dry down, and you're going to see these dead stems with that fluffy, silky seed head on top of it. So pretty easy to spot. There's a picture of that fluffy, silky seed head, and it tends to be drooping towards one side of the seed head or of the plant. So you typically see it on one side more than the other. And it has these kind of long tapering leaves on it. So they're going to be wider at the base and then tapering to a pretty sharp point. And then they typically come off the plant almost at like a 90-degree angle. So they go pretty straight. You can kind of see that in that picture there, them coming off at that 90-degree angle. And so like I said, there is also a native subspecies of Phragmites that you won't see nearly as much. It's very uncommon, but it's important to note that out in case you're looking to control the invasive one to be able to tell it apart. And so I pulled this information straight from this publication here, and I'll after I get done talking, I'll drop the link for this publication into the chat box so you can find it yourself. But this is from University of Minnesota, and it's just a guide to identifying the native and non-native Phragmites. Just some quick points on it. One of the points is that the native variety or native subspecies tends to have a thinner, smaller seed head. It's smaller in size, getting up to 5 or 6 feet rather than 10 to 15 feet. And the non-native seed head tends to be a lot denser and thicker. You can see that here as well. And then there's some slight differences in the leaf shape and then the stems and things like that. So I won't go over all that in this presentation, but if you're interested in really diving deep into how to tell apart the native and non-native Phragmites, this publication here has really good pictures and descriptions on how to do that. So just give you a brief glimpse into the life history and life cycle of Phragmites from about now, that November timeframe all the way through March and April. It's going to be dormant. So you're going to see those standing dead stems with little to no green vegetation on them at all. And then in that April-May timeframe, you're going to start to see things green up. It's going to be vegetation without a seed head from May all the way to some point in July. And then in July through October, you're going to start to see the seed head form and then the seed mature and ripen. And then back to this time of year, it's going to be dormant again, and it's going to be shedding those seeds that it produced. So what impact does it have? Well, of course, it forms dense monocultures, monocultures that can be acres and acres and acres in size. And just to kind of show you this picture here within that green outline is actually a creek that I worked on when I was working in Kentucky. And basically everything that you see inside of that green outline is Phragmites. If you were to go to that site, it's basically Phragmites as far as the eye can see. The only place there's not Phragmites is these little open patches of water here. And then the only reason that there's open patches of water there is because we work to control the Phragmites in that site. So this is a kind of a shallow creek, and it has basically spread across this whole creek kind of basin here, and it's essentially impenetrable, even from a boat or things like that. So we actually had to apply herbicide from a helicopter to be able to control and get in there and access some of those sites. So of course, by outcompeting native plants, it reduces native plants, which are important for cover and food resources for wildlife. It reduces overall wildlife habitat. And so there are some species of wildlife that will use Phragmites. It's very common to see red-winged blackbird nests in Phragmites. But that's not to say it's good for wildlife. Red-winged blackbirds will nest about anywhere. So they're not real picky on what they want. You will find some shorebirds and other things like that may use it. But overall, it reduces the habitat quality for a lot of different wildlife species. From an aesthetic standpoint, if you live around a lake or a pond or a wetland, it has the potential to block your view of the water. So you won't be able to see into the wetland because of its size. And of course, it can block your access for boat traffic, for fishing, for hunting, or even swimming in some of these wetlands. It can also cause what they call drying of the wetland. So as it spreads across the wetland, it sheds that material, and it can actually cause sedimentation and stop the flowing of water, and it will essentially dry out the wetland through other processes like evaporation or evapotranspiration and things like that. So it can take a normal functioning wetland and turn it into a almost completely dry wetland. So here's just a picture of a site that is basically Phragmites as far as you can see until that back tree line. So this is not an uncommon sight to see. This isn't from Indiana, but it's not an uncommon sight to see, especially in the northwest part of the state. So when we think about controlling Phragmites, some of the options we have are going to be either mechanical or chemical. You can mow it and you can cut it with a weed eater, or typically you have to use a brush cutter, which looks like a weed eater with a saw blade on the front of it because the stems are so thick. If that's the option that you choose, you're not going to eradicate it or really control it just with that method unless you do it multiple times over the growing season and multiple times over numerous years. But you can combine that with smothering, so putting black plastic tarp down over it, and that can control Phragmites. But if you just cut it, it's going to keep coming back from those rhizomes, from those roots. You can use prescribed fire, and that's a picture of us burning a field of Phragmites there. I will caution you that it is very flammable, as you can see from that picture, and that's one of the problems it has, is that if it gets into a wetland that's 30 acres of Phragmites, then it's going to be hard to control a fire that's in there. So it can be a fire hazard. But using a prescribed fire on Phragmites can be a really good way of getting rid of all of those dead stems so that it's easier to control later on. And you can use flooding as a way to control Phragmites, especially if you use it in conjunction with a chemical application. So you can treat the site with a chemical application to control it as much as you can. And then if you have the ability to flood the area, then you can flood it. The trick with the flooding is that it has to be completely submerged throughout the summer in order to control Phragmites. So it can't just be, it can't just have wet feet. It has to be completely covered by water, and it has to be during the growing season when it's actively growing. So the other option, and probably the best option, is with a chemical application. And I put an asterisk there next to chemical because, and the point was right up in the chat earlier, when you're using chemicals around waterways, you need to be careful, and you need to actually use herbicides that are labeled for use on or over water. And there's some different chemicals you can find that are actually labeled to use on water. So they have a little bit different formulation and different components to make them less impactful to the water and organisms that live in the water. So when you use a chemical on Phragmites, it's going to be a foliar application. So you're spraying the green growing part of Phragmites. That's typically going to be in that mid to late summer, from July to September, when it's actively growing and before it's had a chance to really pull all those nutrients down to the root system. The trick is there, like Phil mentioned earlier, when you're in years of drought, those applications in that mid to late summer aren't as effective because those plants are under stress and they're not as able to pull those resources down the root system. The two chemicals that are best at controlling Phragmites are imazapyr and glyphosate. And actually the best way to control Phragmites can be with a combination of imazapyr and glyphosate. Now, again, you have to make sure that you're using the water labeled products of those chemicals. For imazapyr, one of the water labeled imazapyr products is called Habitat. For glyphosate, one of the products is called Rodeo. And here's just some information about the application rates and things you would use to control Phragmites. And so that table and then these management strategies here came from this publication, which is called A Guide to the Control and Management of Invasive Phragmites from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And it kind of gives you a couple different options depending on if you have a very large, dense stand of Phragmites or if you have a low density stand. And that can be, starting with treating Phragmites in the early, mid to late summer, and then following that up with a prescribed fire, or following up with a mowing, and then treating the re-sprouts or regrowth of Phragmites the next year. And the same thing on the low density stands. You're typically going to start maybe with a mowing or an herbicide application, come back and treat the site again with a mowing or herbicide or a fire to get rid of a lot of that dead material, and then come back and treat any respouts you might have. So when it comes to identifying and looking for Phragmites, there's really not a whole lot that looks much like it, other than the native common reed, but you may find a couple plants in the wetlands that at first glance may look like could be Phragmites. The first ones are going to be woolgrass, and this is a picture of woolgrass here, and that's a native rush, and it tends to be a lot shorter, and then it has seed heads that droop over more rather than standing straight up like Phragmites. Cattails, we have native cattails. We also have potentially an invasive cattail. Those are going to be much shorter. They're always described as a hot dog on a stick, and you can see, or a corn dog on a stick, and you can see the seed head there. And the leaves tend to be down at the water level rather than up higher on the stem like the Phragmites. So the other one we're going to talk about, one of the other ones is reed canary grass. And so this is one that you commonly see growing in similar areas to Phragmites, but actually you can see reed canary grass kind of growing more outside of wet areas, maybe where you have muckier soils or wetter soils, but it's not actually maybe a true wetland. It grows 10 to 6 feet tall. It's a perennial cool season grass, meaning it's growing best basically this time of year, so October, November, and then through March, April, and May. And then it kind of goes dormant and doesn't grow as much in the summer when it's hotter out. It has a hollow stem. It has a rough textured, sharp leaf, and I'll show you a picture of that here in a second. It's got a spike-like seed cluster or seed head, and then it's typical to find in floodplains, wetlands, stream banks, and anywhere with wet soils. And this is one that was commonly planted as a forage grass for cattle. And so here's an example of that sharp-looking leaf. They tend to grow and almost grow up, and they tend to grow to a kind of a sharp point, and they're rough textured. And then here's a picture of the seed head when it's growing in that April, May timeframe before it opens up. And here's what it looks like after it opens up. It kind of gets a little more open and a little less spike-like. And then one way to tell it apart from some of the native species, native grasses that we may have in these areas is by looking at this. This is called a ligule, and it has this kind of papery or membranous ligule around where the leaf meets the stem. So here's just a couple pictures of what it looks like when it's growing in its colonies. So this is a picture that what it would look like in that April, May, June timeframe where it's green and growing and has the seed heads out. And then this picture down at the bottom is actually a picture that I just took 2 days ago of what it looks like in the winter. So you can pretty easily tell where it is in the winter based on the dead residual stems that you see. So from an impact standpoint, same thing as Phragmites, it forms a monoculture, which reduces plant diversity, you have reduced richness and abundance of insects, and it can change the wetland structure and actually change the soil makeup as far as soil nutrients. And then it can also increase sedimentation in wetlands by changing how water flows through the wetland, and then by shedding a lot of its dead material can cause sedimentation in wetlands. And so that picture over there on the right is this picture here, and that's a drone image of an area that is infested with reed canary grass. And basically, if you look in this area here, this is probably the best example of where reed canary grass is in that area, and it kind of encompasses that entire shot almost of that, where it's that light tan color and even into the green. This picture was taken in April, just as it's starting to really green up. And most of our native plants, which are warm season plants, are still dormant that time of year. So this is just a really good example of how heavily you can get reed canary grass. And this isn't really even a wetland. This is just an area that has wetter soils where it tends to do well. So from a control standpoint, if you're looking to control it mechanically, mowing can be a good option if you use it before herbicide, or mowing and then smothering with a black plastic tarp can also be another option. You can actually use prescribed fire in the late spring. So later April into May can be a good option to reduce reed canary grass, and then even flooding as well. So it likes wet soils, but it doesn't like to be covered completely with water. So if you have an impoundment or a wetland that you have the ability to add more water to, you can flood that area up to a certain depth and leave it there for the summer, and that will help control reed canary grass. You can also control it chemically, and the same thing goes as it does for Phragmites. If you're going to use it around water, you have to use a water-labeled herbicide. So the same herbicides that you could use for Phragmites, you could use to control reed canary grass. And those are best to be applied in the fall. This time of year right now is a really good time of year to apply it after we've had a couple of frosts, and then in the spring, in that March, April timeframe when it starts to green up. Two of the chemicals that you can use are glyphosate and imazapyr. Those are the same ones you could use to control Phragmites. Imazapyr, or a combination of imazapyr and glyphosate, is going to give you better control. And there are a couple of grass selective herbicides, meaning that they're only going to kill grasses. They're not going to kill our wildflowers or our forbs. And those are sethoxydim and fluazafop. I can never say that one right. The trade name of this one's going to be Post. That's where we're going to be seeing it sold as. And those are really good to use if you have an area that maybe you have just a little bit of reed canary grass, but you have all kinds of other native plants that you don't want to kill. So going off that, there's a reed canary grass management guide, and I put the link there, and I'll put it in the chat. That gives you some information about how to control reed canary grass. Some of the recommendations differ based on if you have a monoculture of reed canary grass or if you have reed canary grass in a field that's mixed with native species. The difference is going to be basically whether or not you use an herbicide like imazapyr or glyphosate that's going to kill all the plants in there, or you use a herbicide like sethoxydim or Post, which is a grass selective herbicide, which is just going to kill the grasses in the field. Or if you just spot spray plants in the field rather than spraying the entire field. Some native lookalikes to reed canary grass would be blue joint reed grass. This is what it looks like here. Seed head pretty similar looking to reed canary grass, but if you look at the leaves here, they droop more, so they don't really grow as sharp at an angle or grow upwards like reed canary grass. They're look a little flimsier and grow more and droop towards the ground. You also have rice cut grass, which is a pretty common wetland plant. It's going to be shorter, it's going to have thinner leaves, and it's going to have more of an open seed head. The last one we're going to talk about is purple loosestrife. And it was originally introduced from Eurasia in the 1800s as a landscaping plant. And the difference between it and the reed canary grass and Phragmites is that it's a forb, so it's a broadleaf plant, but it is still rhizomatous and it's a perennial. It typically grows 2 to 6 feet tall. It's pretty easy to identify. It has stems that are angled and leaves that are opposite or whorled, and it has purple flowers on these spikes. So here's some really good pictures of purple loosestrife. So you can see the purple flowers there. The top right shows you the opposite leaves and then the angled or square stems. And then that bottom right picture shows you what it can look like across the whole wetland in the summer. Similar impacts: it forms a monoculture, reduces plant diversity, can impact and reduce wildlife habitat, and it can alter the wetland function and processes about how water flows and is filtered through the wetland. Controlling it, there's a few more options. Mechanically, you can control it by hand pulling and getting the root system out. There actually is a biological control for purple loosestrife. There's a few leaf-eating beetles that have been released to control purple loosestrife, and they've actually done a pretty good job. There's I think there's been even releases in Indiana in certain places to control purple loosestrife, but even farther up north into Minnesota, there's been releases as well, and they do a pretty good job at controlling purple loosestrife. It's not something that you necessarily have the option to go buy or get, but they may be out in the environment. When it comes to chemical, again, same thing. If it's around water, you have to use a water labeled herbicide. It's going to be a foliar application. You're going to apply it on the green growing plant in the early to late summer. And then you're going to be using something like glyphosate, imazapyr, or even triclopyr, which Phil mentioned earlier for controlling wing burning bush. It can control purple loosestrife as well. And that's going to be things, I can't recall off the top of my head what the water labeled variety of triclopyr is, but you just have to make sure you get the right product. So those are the three that I wanted to cover, and I'm going to provide a few more resources here in the chat box for learning more information about these species. And there's certainly more wetland invasives, but these are three pretty common ones that you'll see out in the landscape. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions, depending on how much time we have.
You still have a few minutes. Remember,
All right.
so remember, we have, extra time built in already a little bit. So I do
Perfect.
see one of the first questions in the chat was, when is the best time to burn?
For which species is there? It may differ between species. So for Phragmites, burning in the spring in that February, March, late winter, early spring, February, March timeframe is a really good time to burn to get rid of all the dead material so that you can come back with an herbicide application or with even smothering, and you're not having to deal with all of that 10 to 15 feet tall standing dead material, which helps you use less herbicide that way because you're not spraying as much vegetation. If it's reed canary grass, then you're going to push that burning back into that April, May timeframe because you want it to be actively growing, and then that'll help control it and kind of hit it when it's growing.
All right, thank you. One more, is there a native form of reed canary grass?
So that's a good question, and I don't know if there's a consensus, if there is or not. I have read some articles that make the case that there was a native variety of reed canary grass, but I don't know if there's actual consensus on that. And then the other thing I read is that it's potentially been hybridized so much with the invasive reed canary grass that you can't really tell the difference if there is even a native variety of it.
If anybody else has any, you can either unmute or continue to type in the chat pod. We'll go with that for another couple minutes.
And
I'll just my not really a question. My experience with the Phragmites. So I've been trying to control that for several years, and it's not an easy thing to do. The stems on those can flip down and spread like 10 feet or more in a year, and each little node sprouts up a new plant. And this year with the drought, I've noticed ones sprouting up in spot like the water level's gone down, and new plants have sprouted up where they hadn't been growing in several years. So I'm not sure if those root systems can lie dormant under the water for several years. It's just
they can. Yes.
Yeah. So I was sprayed like 3 times this fall, and there's still more popping up after that. So I'll see what, maybe they get flooded out. Who knows?
Yeah, I was going to say that in years of drought, they can actually do better because then it exposes more soil as the wetland is dry. There's still moisture in the soil, probably not enough moisture in the soil that they can exploit it, but now they're not competing with standing water. So it can help them spread even farther. So I just dropped a bunch of links to all the things that I talked about in the presentation. So feel free to click on them, and they're all free to download as well.
Last chance for any other quick comments or questions. All right. And I do believe here sometime soon, Phil Woolery will also drop in the chat pod as well. As we're getting close to wrapping up, we want you to have a chance to click on the link. We do have a survey that we'd like for you to fill out. I apologize. Just as kind of a follow-up of today's program of what other topics you'd like to see in the future. We're going to drop that early, like now and again later, just to make sure that you don't miss the link. So we do want you to stay on, but we don't want you to miss the link. So that should drop into the chat sometime here soon as well. But we're going to now go on to Rebecca Wallace. So if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen, you can. Rebecca is joining us from Georgia, if I'm correct, and has been a major player in the EDS maps as well, which obviously we've already mentioned today at least once. So she's going to give you guys all kind of a down low about, what you can do with this website and how it is beneficial. Because like I said, you've already seen that at least Callie Bontrager had used it in her presentation. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Rebecca. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, so this will just be kind of a really quick overview of EdMaps. We do give regular webinars and presentations on each specific part of some of the things I'm going to talk about. So this is just kind of, maybe you've only just heard the word EdMaps. Here's kind of what we have to offer. My screen is being shared, right?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. I don't have the green box around my monitor, so I was like, let's make sure. So I'm just going to go over mainly these top bars, these top menu options, just because they give a really good overview of these are the things you mainly come to EdMaps for. So most people, when they want to go to EdMaps, maybe they want to report something they saw. You can report through the website. You can also report through some of our smartphone apps. We actually have the EdMaps app, which was launched late last year and early this year for the two different Apple and Apple and Android platforms. And we also have EdMaps Pro, which is mainly for professionals. But this is what the reporting through the website looks like. So first you'll pick the type of species you're going to be reporting. And the reason we ask this is because each of these categories have slightly different forms. So we've been talking about plants so far in this webinar. So I'll just kind of show you what the plants form looks like. So we're going to go ahead and pick the state, so Indiana. And it'll just load for a second. And then this is what generally the form looks like. So there are only a few actually required fields, and they're in red. Most of these fields also have tooltips that if you hover over the question mark, it'll give you information about that. So let's just pick Japanese knotweed. You'll pick what the status of this infestation is. So positive is I saw it. Negative is I looked for it and did not find it, which is really important when you're documenting survey efforts, volunteer efforts, but also tracking the spread of an invasive species as its range is expanding. And I saw it and I treated it at that same time. So if you're actually doing polls or treatment programs, things like that, you can document that at this time. Observation date, it defaults to the current date, but you can change that. And then the rest of this information in this infestation area is optional. You can put in the area that's been surveyed, the amount of infested area, the abundance, description, so forth. And this infestation section is the one that mainly changes between the different insect, wildlife, and so forth forms. Location, so we picked Indiana to start with. We're just going to pick a random county and it'll zoom that map in on that random county I picked. And then you can either drop a point or you can draw a polygon. If you actually draw a polygon, it'll fill in the centroid, latitude, and longitude there. But if you go back up to this infested area field, it automatically fills that in. So that's really helpful. You can add additional information about the location, the land ownership. So this field, private, that's a really important field. Private governs the public visibility of the shape or coordinates you drop. So if you don't want people to know this is on private land, you would want to select this as yes. When the record is reviewed, verifiers also have the opportunity to select yes if they know this is on private property. So there's two levels of being able to hide the exact coordinates of an observation's location. If you select yes, the record will only appear on state and county maps. It won't appear on any sort of point maps. It won't appear in shapefile downloads because there's no shape associated with it. You can add up to 5 images. And you can add additional comments. You can talk about if it's been submitted to a herbaria or museum and so forth. And then you would submit your record. When a record is submitted, I mentioned that it's reviewed. So we do have a verifier network that evaluates the accuracy of the reports. This is a little different than some other programs do, but this helps to have some quality control on the reports that come in, because we do get people submitting test records and so forth. So I'm just going to go to the distribution maps now. Most of you have seen these maps. We saw one earlier, actually. That was a county level distribution map. So you can just pick a map. So we'll just pick garlic mustard. And I'm going to pick state for that. So this shows a very broad view of the states that garlic mustard has been found in. If we go down to counties, it shows a county level map of where garlic mustard has been found in. So if you selected negative and when you were reporting that species, it won't show up here because that's a negative record. It's not actually present. And so there's one county in Ohio missing, and there's one county in Pennsylvania missing, and that's just gaps in the data. So we're always looking for help filling in these gaps. You know, there's a couple counties, few counties in Indiana missing, and I'm sure you guys would be able to fill those in. The point map, so for polygons, it puts centroids on this map. For county level records, they don't appear whatsoever. So this gives you an idea of the records that have been positively found. The negative records are displayed as well. Treated and eradicated are also on here. Eradicated is not an option if you're first time reporting a record. It's because you need to have some evidence of when it was there, not just that it was there at some point in the past. For revisits, we do have eradicated as an option. Revisits can be done through this website, but they can also be done through the EdMaps Pro app. So that map just populated there, and you can click on any of these records and go to that specific record if you did want to see it. So we'll just go check that out real quick. And this is all the information provided by the reporter for this particular record. And it tells you everything they entered, some additional information from us, as well as who verified it and how they did so. And then you can see it shows the map of where this particular species was found. One more thing I want to show you that is on some of these, but not on some others. So there are two types of county level maps here that you might not be familiar with. So these two maps, the future range and future certainty, talk about where this species will be in the years 2040 to 2060. So it gives you an idea based on up to 13 models, what's the likelihood that species will be there based off of some work done by Jenica Allen. So we'll just click on the future certainty just to give you an idea of, according to anywhere from 1 to 13 models, where they're expecting garlic mustard to be. And I can answer some more questions about this later, but there's some more to this, but I just wanted to give you guys like, oh, this is what it looks like. Species information is exactly like it sounds. You pick a species and here's some information about it. Here's potentially how to identify it. Here's some resources about it. Here's some selected images from the Bugwood Image Database. Any maps we have, including county level maps. Also, does this appear on any state species lists? Does it appear on the most common and troublesome agricultural weed list? Invasive listing sources and more. So very, very kind of quick information about these different species. The tools and training page, lots of tools, lots of training materials available. Couple things I want to show you. Most important one is really this advanced query tools. If you want to query data from us, if you want to get data back out of us, it's publicly available after it's been reviewed and made so. You can put in reporters, you can put in species, you can do whole divisions. So let's say I wanted to do insects, and let's say I wanted to see insects just in Indiana. I can fill out a lot more information, but we're just going to do this real quick. See what Insects in Indiana provides us. So this provides your results up here. 80,000 plus records. Almost all of them have exact locations. So some amount of those don't have coordinates associated with them. And it's populating the map right now. So it's just showing you positive, negative, and if we do have data for it, treated and eradicated. And this will be things like emerald ash borer, brown marmorated stink bug, things like that. You can download the data as a CSV, which is kind of like an Excel file, a KML, which is a Google Earth file, or a shape file, which will actually be multiple shape files depending on if there's polygon data, line data, and so forth. The CSV will include that county level data. The other two will not, because those are actually putting points or polygons on a map, which county level data doesn't have that information. So it's going to populate for a little while, but if you click on either of these, you'll get a notification that you should look at your email, because you'll get an email with the data. Back to the tools and training. I mentioned, so on the right-hand side, there's all these different training materials, and it goes through how to use the website, how to use the apps, and so forth. We have them as PowerPoints, PDFs, there's also webinars. The other thing I want to show you is the report verifier lookup. So if we wanted to see who would review a brown marmorated stink bug record in Madison County, Indiana, these are the people that would get that email for reviewing the record. And so any one of them would have the opportunity to review that record. So you can look this up and just see, okay, well, who's a verifier for this, who's a verifier for that? And you can change it to any species you want, and it'll tell you who the verifiers could be for that. So there's a lot more tools available. I just wanted to point those few out. The last thing I'm going to talk about is My Edmaps. So it's when you go to My Edmaps, this dashboard is fairly new. It tells you for the last year, so the date range is on the top right there, what your data is. So it's for reviewed data only. So this is what you would expect to see on the actual maps that are publicly available. So I've made 14 county level reports. 11 of those have points associated with them, and it covers 8 subjects. If I zoom in on this map, it'll show where those records are. So I've got one county in North Georgia and then a couple counties in South Georgia. These are my subjects I reported, the taxa I reported. So I'm a little more insect heavy this year than plant. Some basic statistics about what I've been reporting, and my recent reports. You would be able to do your bulk uploads through here. So if your SISMA has been collecting data for 10 years in some Excel files, you can click on the left on bulk uploads and submit that data to us, and we will help you put that in so that you don't have to put things in one by one. You can also view your downloads through here. So on this, I'm talking about this bar on the left here. You can view your downloads through here. You can do all kinds of different stuff through My Edmap. So I highly recommend you check out our different training materials that could help you figure some of this stuff out. And I can answer any questions you have as well. So I think that's about my time. I tried to go through this pretty quick. So do we have any questions?
You do have one question, at least so far. And it's a question more on the app side of it.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it up to you if you think you have time and ability to try to pull the app up now. But it says they have I'm going to call it Glidden app. I'm probably mispronouncing the GLED.
Yeah, Glendon or Glendon. Yeah.
Well, it just confused me with the D and N. But anyways,
yeah.
Should I get Edmaps, or do they do the same thing?
So the Edmaps app is kind of the new thing we're going to be moving towards. So historically what happened was we had these different programs that yeah, they wanted apps, and so they wanted to work with us. And they there were two things that kind of influenced this. One, people wanted their own branding on the apps, which is fine. So that's how we ended up with a bunch of branding when you open up some of the apps. But then also, when these apps were created, there wasn't the technology we have now, which was that you could download basically a piece of an app, and then once you made some decisions, you would get kind of an update to it. So with the old apps, you downloaded the app and you got the field guide, you got the species list, and anything that happened, like adding a new species, we would have to update the entire app. The way it is now with EdMaps and EdMaps Pro is that we can, you download the app, and it's a very small app, and then you choose your state, and it downloads the field guide for that particular state as a kind of secondary thing that happens after. And when we make an update, so say when Asian giant hornet came in, we were asked to add the species to the relevant apps. It did not require the user to update EdMaps Pro or EdMaps, but to add it to the Washington Invasives app, it required them to either manually or accept an update for that app. So things move a little faster with the EdMaps and EdMaps Pro apps in that respect. So I would say, yes, start looking into the EdMaps app, just because that's where we're going. So any other questions?
I'm not seeing any directly at this time, but if anybody wants to unmute and ask any questions, feel free to do so at this time as well.
So, and like I was saying, we do on this tools and training page, we have the EdMaps app walkthrough. So if you click on that, you can see the app as, you know, everything from how to download it, how to interact with it, and how to, this is not the right one. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. Let's see. No, we have the wrong thing uploaded to that link. I'll fix that later. So, but we also have, so yeah, this one's right, the EdMaps Pro walkthrough. So this, again, it takes you all the way through how it works, how to download, how to download county data and so forth. With the EdMaps Pro app, we've actually added in, if you're a verifier, you can verify records, you can review records in the app. So if you're out in the field and something comes in, or if you're going to a certain area, you can go and actually visit those sites and review the records in field. So that's a new thing that we've rolled out for our verifiers. So, well, I'm
Hey,
available
Rebecca.
if we have any, you know, if anyone wants to email me any questions.
I had a quick question. This is Mandy with Sictum on the app. I know with the app, I've had a few problems having it go through, and I know some of my coworkers also. Should I do the Pro? Right now I just have the regular one. Or why have you had a lot of errors with this app?
We've had a few. There are some bug reports that our programmer knows about and is working on. So if you just if you've emailed us or sent feedback through the app itself, then we'll make sure that that particular bug is addressed. So we've noticed a few things, and he's working on them. So hopefully those bugs will all be worked out very soon. The Android app has had fewer bugs. It's also been out longer, so that's potentially part of it. It's had a lot more testing that's been done, and independent people, you know, playing around with it.
Thank you. And do you recommend the pro over the regular?
They're for very different audiences. That's why the two exist. So pro has absolutely no field guide in it. Pro allows you to do revisits, which some people may find very, very useful, or some people may never end up using it at all. Because if you're just going out hiking, camping, whatever, then you're just going to new places. And so you're not out there doing any sort of treatments or polling or whatever. If you're a verifier, I do suggest pro because of the in-app reviewing options. If you're part of a SISMA or something where you are potentially going to be doing some treatments, then yes, I do recommend pro. That way you can document one population over time rather than 10 different points all stacked on top of each other.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have kind of a follow-up to what you were just talking about, but a little bit different. And I'm going to actually share a quick thing and point out. So the question basically is relating around, I have property, how do I get a walkthrough to see, what is or isn't there and how to maintain stuff. So hopefully you are seeing my screen right now where basically there are some assistance. So sorry, this is cutting a little bit off, but I wanted to make it bigger overall so you could see it. Through different SISMAs, you might find assistance with walking through landowners. Sometimes, if I'm correct, Callie, there might be some assistance with DNR or with your local extension office. And I see, since you said Stark, I'll pick on Phil. But I would encourage anyone needing things like that, get a hold of one of those 3 people or entities, and I'm sure between that you will find some information. I think Phil, you're going to say something.
Yeah, go. You can contact me or Mandy. She just talked to. She can do that. You're part of the classified forest, so their district forester, I forget his name. He just started like a month ago.
James Potoff? Oh
No, we're in different district in Stark County.
sorry.
So he just started. Oh, Ben Wilson, I see in the chat. So yeah,
There you go.
so that would be your different resources for that. So
yeah, hopefully that helps you out there. So with no further ado, we're actually caught up on our time. We're gonna move to start into letting some of the SISMAs actually present about what they have going on. Actually, I'm sorry. Let me switch how I'm doing something real quick. Yes, I want to share that. Okay, well, we'll share that PowerPoint, and then hopefully. All right. Are you seeing the full screen picture of that, or are you probably seeing?
nope. Interview.
You're seeing the other one.
Yeah, presenter.
I figured that was going to happen to me because of what I thought was happening. All right, there we go. That's what I want to share. There we go. That should be right. So with that, Jared O'Brien is with the Soil and Water Conservation District in Porter County, and he is a part of the SISMA up here in this area that's kind of expanding to different counties. So he is going to talk about this SISMA and what they have to offer, or we're trying to gather together. So Jared, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Nikki. How's my audio?
You sound good right now.
Cool, good deal. All right, so yeah, I've been asked to share a little bit about our SISMA group here, and as Nikki mentioned, you can see on the slide we cover Porter and LaPorte counties, the entire county, and that's something I want to point out specifically. So I guess first off, I understand that I'm at the end of a training where you guys have heard a ton of information already. So thanks in advance for your continued attention, and I'll try and keep this short. So our SISMA group, known as PLANT, Porter LaPorte Advancing Natives Team, was formed by the local SPCDs up here, representing the 2-county area, and so far we've gained a lot of support from other like-minded agencies and interested stakeholders. We kind of started out right before COVID, and we've been trying to kind of trudge through that. So while some SISMAs are focused on watersheds or drainage basins, ours is certainly not. And I'm very glad that it's not, that we're set up for countywide coverage, and that I've seen firsthand the limitations of projects that are based on watershed boundaries. So as of right now, we have around 30 group members. Those group members consist of conservation agency staff, contractors, Parks Department personnel, universities, but also, and most importantly, private landowners. And I think that's really the end goal, and these SISMAs should be driven by private landowners ultimately. So looking at the screen here, the vision and objectives are still in draft form, but are looking pretty promising. So you can see outlined that some of the group's objectives include prevention, detection, rapid response, and control. So I'm not going to read them to you. You can see the individual goals relative to each of those objectives there. And so, like I kind of mentioned, while the current world situation has not necessarily made it easy to meet and connect with new partners and landowners, we still have been knocking out site visits. We're seeing increased participation within our group. Mandy from SICM has been super helpful with site visit workload as well. So I guess one thing I really want to point out is that I'm kind of proud of the districts have this invasive tree exchange program, and we're able to roll that into this group as an outreach tool for plants. So this program, a little bit of background, was funded through Community, which was originally limited to the Lake Michigan watershed, being that it was, I think, Forest Service GLRI funds. However, beginning next spring, hopefully with continued support from the Community program and additional funds from Kankakee and Yellow River Basin Commission, the plan is for this program to be expanded and made available for all landowners within Porter and LaPorte County, regardless of the watershed. So one thing I want to point out, looking at that little map that's got the NLCD data on it, you can see that moraine has a huge influence on our geography, right? And primarily agriculture down south. Something that's pretty interesting that just came up is, I get a text sent to me from a farmer, what is this growing in the field? And it looked to me from the picture that it was Japanese knotweed sprouting up. So invasives, as you know, because previous presenters have kind of picked on our area a little bit, the knotweed on 30, and of course the Phragmites anywhere along highways or toll roads, even with continued essentially control in private ag lands. I mean, these plants are still present and they're very persistent. Roadside ditches is where I see knotweed popping up a whole lot too. But we're looking for more people to be involved. There's an email listed there on the slide, but the group also has a Facebook page. Some of the people on this call are heavily involved. Nikki, Julie with ISDA, Steve Martinson with Valpo Parks, and of course Andy. So that's really all I have. We're still in early stages. We're just trying to keep momentum through the situation we're in right now. But thanks for listening.
Thanks, Jared. Any quick questions for him?
Okay, Nikki, you can unshare the screen. I'll introduce Heather Rogers. She's part of our group with the Stark and Pulaski group. I'll let her introduce herself. So Heather, you can unmute yourself and give an introduction about our group.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so Stark and Pulaski Native Plant Initiative started separately. Pulaski County, we started with a group. We applied for a grant and did the conservation through community leadership program through Purdue to kind of get our goals together and see kind of the best course of action. Stark County started with Mandy's predecessor, Erica and Phil, and they actually got to do a weed wrangle last year for garlic mustard at the Tippecanoe River State Park. And then later in the year, after we joined forces, we got to do a work day with the Prairie Trails Club on the Erie Trail. It's one of the rail trails. And their biggest, they have lots of invasive species, but that work day was for some Siberian elm trees. So this year, obviously with COVID, we had some issues with some in-person activities. We had some more weed wrangles planned, and we had a sort of bio blitz or a native plant walk. We were going to go to Stark County Forest and identify native plants and invasive plants and just kind of get a feel for the area. And that turned into a virtual thing. Phil kind of got it started. It's a Google map. So you get to go into the forest, walk around, and if you have your phone and the Google map up, you can find different plants throughout the Stark County Forest and see what they are. And I think kind of the goal is to do that at different times throughout the year so you can see what plants are in bloom. Other than that, we have a Facebook page going. Things are a little bit slow because we can't meet in person all that much. But we're hoping to get more people interested. At first, it seemed like the Bass Lake area was the people who were really interested in participating. But I think as long as next year we can get some more in-person programs going, I think we'll get more people who are interested. That's pretty much what I have for our group.
Yeah, and if you guys are interested in either group in that survey thing, if you can click on there in that link in the chat there and fill out give feedback from the program, and then you can click if you're interested in events or helping out with either group. There's an option in that survey too. You can put in your email, and so you can be made aware of events and meetings and everything there. So.
And I will pop in real quick and say, because time is nearing and so that you have a chance to do it, I kept saying and hinting that for the pesticide credits, we would tell you at the end what to do. So if you need pesticide credits, you have two options. You can put your name and your license number or last four of your social security number in the chat. You can either privately chat me, Nikki Witkowski, or you can put it for the group, but obviously then your license number is out there. Or I will also put my email address in, and you can do that. If there are multiple people at your site, that's fine. Just enter multiple ones in, or like I said, make sure you email me back with that. And again, make sure you put your name, and I need license number or last four of your social security unless you've already sent it to me. So I'll then jump back and say, are there any final questions for all of our presenters? I guess I am hearing none. So I want to say one last huge thank you to all of our presenters today and everything that made it great. Already starting to get some of those comments in the chat pod. So we really, really appreciate you guys spending your morning with us, both presenting and being in on this Zoom call. I think you hopefully heard a lot of great information this morning and got some valuable information. I know I did. So we want to thank you all for what you have done and what you're doing. Again, please fill out the survey link so that way we know what to continue to have topics on, as well as remember again, yes, if you need those credits, make sure you either type it in the chat before you leave or email myself. My email is pretty easy as long as you spell my name right, Nikki, Nikky @ Purdue.edu. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us today.